Alrighty, good evening, everyone. Happy Monday night. Welcome to this episode of Communications and Cigars for Monday. What time were we here? Monday, January 17th, 2022. Second episode of their good evening to everybody that is checking in. I'm glad to see that you were referred to by Ham Nuggets, temporary offline, and a TO show. So TO show's right in front of us. So it's nice, kind of like a segue, kind of schedule out your money, because guess what? Football's going to go ahead and be coming to an end soon, and what are you going to have to do on Monday nights? You're going to have to watch TO show, then come over to mine. Don't forget about our other guys here, Coffee and Ham Radios. We'll get to all that in just one second here, but welcome to tonight's show. So tonight's show is entitled The Physiology of a Repeater. So we're going to kind of continue on the discussion, sort of what we did last week. So last week we did anatomy of a repeater, which really kind of created a lot of good questions. And some people said, well, wait a minute, you covered the aspects of a repeater, which is really great, but kind of have some more questions because there's other types of repeaters out there. So can you kind of answer some of those questions? And so tonight we're going to delve into a little bit about dealing with bi-directional repeaters, or in crossband repeating. And I'm going to show you here, I'm going to grab my little thing here. I'm going to show you a little project I'm working on with these two little babies that I think many will like. I think, okay? Well, I don't think. So on there. So, let's get in there. I see a lot of people in the chat. Thank you very much for everybody that has jumped in here. Let me go ahead and move up my screen here, and we'll start off from the top. So Liberty Cave, good evening. KK6USY, Chuck, thanks for coming in. Scout 75, on there. Life at Terminal Velocity. So good evening, Paul Hotman. Thank you very much for joining in. Phil, W0RPH, TO, W4JMC, Roger McKeenan, and Covain, good evening. T-Ray, good evening on there too. Brian, AD8GI is in there also. And Evan I'm going to slaughter that. Barca? Is it Bar Cake? Evan, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. And then Dan Martin checking in here, W1BUS. So thank you for everybody checking in. Kind of, you know what? We like to have fun. We like to do education on here. So what I'm going to kind of do is just kind of show you a little bit here. Just want to give a little here. I'll move my microphone out of the way. Never forget, people. Never forget. Alrighty. So never forget. What's a cassette tape? What's a bar check? Okay, good. Thank you, Evan bar check on there. So never forget VHF, never forget cassette, and never forget floppy. Mike, WZ9Z, good evening for checking in also too. You know, I had a funny thing I saw sometime. Someone went along and they said, and they showed a picture of a 3.5-inch floppy disk, and they said, why would someone go ahead and 3D print the save button on my computer? So I had a laugh at that one here, and that's kind of there. So thank you to my lovely wife for going ahead and purchasing this shirt. I really kind of love it. And you know, it's total Geekville, total Geekville on there. So once again, tonight's episode, Physiology of a Repeater. Before we get into that, I want to go ahead and say a special thank you to the guys over at Coffee and Ham Radio. I consider them my YouTube brothers from another mother, okay? Because they were nice enough. They had me on their show on Sunday. We had a great discussion on there, and talked a little bit about a couple different things, what brought you into ham radio, which was really good topics on here. And then in addition, we got to talk about 3D printers, and don't tell anybody this. We'll whisper it really quietly. So there, I think I may have convinced my wife to allow me to have a 3D printer. I think I might have. Well, we'll see. That'll be the pending update. That will be 3D printer watch 2022. Alrighty, and also Wild Cascadia Radio, thank you for coming in here tonight. W4ORH also on there too. So Communications Cigars, we talk about a communications topic, and then we talk about cigars. Well, guess what? There was a question that was actually asked on Coffee and Ham Radio. So, by the way, I have my notes here. I should have done there. Who is Coffee and Ham Radios? Well, we have KK6USY. That's on that show, their Ham Radio Adventures. Ham Radio Dude is on there. T.O. and the Smoking Ape. Now, the Smoking Ape was not there this weekend on there for at least the Sunday show. I was a little busy, tied up on Saturday, so I watched for just a little bit, but then I had to do some other things on there. But those four guys do a great show. If you're looking for something on the weekend, they do 2 shows, live shows usually, Saturday and Sunday, and they have really great, interesting topics on there. So I can't but help recommend those guys into there. But one of the questions that came up was, like, what kind of cigars do I like? And the best thing about it is there are such a wide variety of cigars that are out there in different pleasing palates. Because I do get asked this a fair amount. I say, a lot of people say, hey, John, what is a good cigar? I want to get a cigar, or I have friends of mine, they're like, I didn't know that you smoke cigars and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I enjoy one occasionally. I mean, probably in the winter months here, I'm lucky if I can have one a week, if that. In the summer months, a little bit better because, hey, it's warmer and the nights are out there and all this kind of stuff like that. So it's really going to come down to, there's basically sort of like other kind of spices or intensities or heat. There is a mild, there is a medium, and there is a heavy flavor or wrapper or taste on there. Now, mild cigars are just that. They're very mild. They're pleasing to the palate. They don't produce a very strong nicotine in some cases. Medium cigars can go either way. And heavy cigars, or full body cigars sometimes they're called, or there's a couple different names that people use for them. They can be pretty intense. And I will tell you this, if you've never had a cigar before, or you do smoke cigars, but you don't do a regular basis, I would go ahead and take a look at the different intensities, is I guess the best way I'll put it, of the cigar. Now, a lot of it has to do with wrapper or wrapping of the cigar. So basically the tobacco leaf and how tight they wrap it, if they have fillers in there, that can really increase the intensity of a cigar. Now, what I tend to go ahead and do is I like the mild to medium type cigars, and that's where a lot of I like the Macanudos, I like the Deadwood Tobacco Companies on there. I am trying to think what other ones that I've had recently on there. I've had a few of the Noobs. Let's see what else. I've had a lot of Capones, the little Capones too, the Cigaros, which are about the size of a cigarette, but they actually are cigar wrappings on there. And Cigaros came a lot out of the Old West. Like if you've seen Clint Eastwood, I was associating with Dirty Harry. Clint Eastwood in like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, or For a Few Dollars More, those kind of things. A lot of times people had cigars, and the cigars, they didn't have humidors, they didn't have good things. The cigars would flake off a little bit. So what a lot of people would actually go ahead and do is they would actually take the cigar shavings, the parts that broke off, and then they would kind of take a good tobacco leaf that they used on a cigar, take one off of there, and they would roll them up, sort of like a cigarette, but then they would smoke that tobacco from the cigar as the size of a cigarette on there. So a good question that just popped up, I saw in the comments here, and said, John, do you have a favorite cigar shop, or do you buy online? I'm actually very fortunate to have the best of both worlds. There's technically 3 cigar shops near me, near the Twin Cities and into just the Twin Cities or the east suburbs that I can go to that have a wide variety. The Kentucky Fire was another one. I just remembered that. The Kentucky Fire, it smells like I like to do meat smoking also too. So it has a nice smell, like if I'm smoking a good brisket or a rack of ribs or some sausage or something like that on there. So those I like there. So I can go locally if I need to. Otherwise, I go to cigars.com. That's where I've gotten a lot of mine on there. Now, there's no preference in whatever, because there is cigar.com, there's cigars.com. There's a couple different online places that are on there to actually purchase cigars. And what I tell people is I said, shop around. Because just like with anything in the world, especially if you're doing mail order, shop around. Definitely. Some are going to give you better pricing on maybe one brand versus another brand. Some are going to give you better pricing on, let's say, for an example, if you buy, a 5-pack, or sometimes people sell 10 packs, or I should say a box of cigars. It all is kind of up there. In the pricing structure and everything on there. There are a few that are in high demand right now. So if I was to give a cigar recommendation, I would talk about the Kentucky Fire cigar. And they were they're really, really great. I shouldn't say were, but like when I was able to order them, I got them as a gift from my wife and from family. They bought me a whole bunch right away because they know they're so hard to find. There's that much of a popular of a cigar on there. So that's kind of where I do it. Around the Twin Cities here, there's a few things. There's a Sodi cigar. There's a St. Croix tobacco company. And then believe it or not, there's a place that's actually called Total Wine. And I know Total Wine's across many states. But not only do they have obviously a great selection of wine that I do sometimes on the porch for my Sips and Smokes lounge, where we enjoy sips and we enjoy smokes. But they have a nice, huge, it almost looks like a refrigerator freezer case, for sake of a better term, with the glass doors and everything like that you'd find in a grocery store. And they have a huge selection of there. And it's all temperature controlled, and they're all locked. You can't open it up. You got to get an employee, because they do sell some high-end cigars on there. So that's about it for cigars this week. Let's talk about communications. And actually, before that, I'm all off tonight. Go ahead. You got an idea for the show or something like that? Go ahead and email me. It's kind of right here. Email communications-cigars. And my shirt is really messing up tonight. Here, I'll try to put my arm there. Can you see that better with there? There you go. Communications-cigars at jjkcom.com. So once again, communications with an S -cigars. So all one word, at jjkcom.com. JJK Communications does help me sponsor the show. I'm very appreciative of that. That's how we can get some of the other things. We're actually doing some things behind here, which I've talked about, which we'll get going to hopefully in another week. Knock on wood here. So let's talk about the big thing tonight, which is going to be the physiology of repeater. So we talked about the anatomy of the repeater, where we said, okay, what are the parts and the pieces we need to put up a repeater? Alrighty. We obviously, last week, we talked about the antenna, we talked about the coax, we talked about the duplexer, we talked about the repeater, which is basically a transmitter and a receiver, and a controller of some sort. But now we're going to get into the physiology of a repeater. So this is actually going to be some more of the deeper looking or core contents of a repeater, but more so how things work in a repeater. Because, yeah, you need these things for a repeater, but now we get to look in what we kind of have as options. So on the screen here, we have a picture of just the basic repeater in general. This is how repeaters work day in and day out. Your simple conventional repeater. And I don't care if it's a VHF, UHF, digital analog. This is just one frequency in, one frequency out. Once again, we're not talking about trunking. We're not talking about linked systems, anything like that. It's just a simple standalone repeater. Now, on this one, what I have here is I have transmit frequency A. So radio is transmitting into the repeater. And in this case, I use the example, I use frequencies 159.0000. Now, mind you, this applies to multiple radio services. So any radio service that can have a repeater, this is pretty much it. So we're talking about amateur, we're talking about GMRs, we're talking about business, we're talking about public safety. Alrighty. FRS, the simplex. CB, it's simplex. Marine, they do have some shipboard repeaters and stuff like that, but not as in the conventional marine channels we think. It's usually radio to radio on there. So once again, amateur, GMRS, business, public safety, those kind of things like that on there. So you go in on one frequency, the repeater receives it simultaneously, puts it onto another frequency, and increases power and spits it out. Not a problem whatsoever. But now what we have to do, now what we have to talk about is we're going to talk about crossbanding repeating here. Alrighty? And crossbanding repeating comes in and makes a little bit of a different world occur. because crossbanding can be a couple different varieties. It can be bidirectional or it could be unidirectional. What we mean by bidirectional is obviously user A goes into the repeater, it transmits out to user B. User B transmits into the repeater, it goes out to user A. All right. In addition to that, you also have unidirectional crossband repeating. And what unidirectional crossband repeating is just that. It's unidirectional. You go in on one frequency, whether it's VHF or UHF, and you come out on the opposite band's frequency. So if you go in UHF, you come out VHF. You go in VHF, you come out UHF. In addition to that, bidirectional also has duplexed bidirectional. And a good example of a duplexed bidirectional system would be as if you have a UHF repeater and you have a VHF repeater and they're linked together. And that's sort of what I have on the top here. Now, bidirectional repeating for crossbanding does not, I want to stress, does not need to be simplex to simplex. If your radio is capable of it or your setup is capable of it, you can have what we have on the picture here. So what's happening is if we look at the left side of the picture, we see that radio transmitting into the repeater on 457.0000. And then simultaneously on the other side, the repeater's transmitting on 152.000. Once again, these are just general frequencies for reference, okay? Now, likewise, if we had that bidirectional simplex repeater, we're basically going to cover the bottom frequencies. We're going to cover the 452 and we're going to cover the 159. Alrighty? So one goes in on 457 and comes out on 152. The other user goes in on 152 and comes out on 457. What we have set up here is kind of looking at a duplexed frequency bidirectional repeater. Now, yeah, that's a mouthful. And there's a reason that's a mouthful. Because in this case, what's happening is now this is going to be used, especially when you're linking systems together. Now, I said we're not going to talk about linking, but you have to understand that there may become times where you have a repeater such as this setup where it's really one repeater, but it has two transmitters and two receivers in it. And repeaters like that do exist. I think Tate has a repeater out there that they made that you can put in multiple modules, that the multiple modules, you can have multiple receive and multiple transmit, and you could have it set up that any of the receiving modules would cause, so, and they did this a lot, like a VHF and an 800 megahertz module, and then they had a VHF and 800 megahertz transmitting module. Well, what would end up happening is if you go in on 800, you would come out on VHF and 800. If you went in on VHF, you'd come out on VHF and 800. And what this does is that helps facilitate interoperability or the bridging of systems, which we'll kind of maybe talk about that in another show later on down the line. But for right now, all intents and purposes, what we're looking at here is in a bidirectional is that a user goes in on one frequency band and comes out on a different frequency band. And then the user B goes in on that other frequency band and comes out. So once again, UHF to VHF, and then they transmit VHF back to UHF. That's bidirectional. Duplex is just having different frequencies in there. So for an example, the UHF person here is going to listen to the repeater on 452.000, but they're going to transmit into the repeater on 457.000. Now, the VHF side is just that. The VHF users are going to receive out on 152.000, and they're going to transmit into the repeater on 159.000. Now, this is once again bidirectional repeating. Now, I stress bidirectional because this is what we have in our mind, as especially as amateurs. If we're talking amateur radio operation, we think, when we say crossband, we think bidirectional. Hands down, we think bidirectional. Alrighty? And with my little project that I'm working on here, I just happen to have this one, just the dual band radio that I have. This dual band radio can be set up for crossband repeating. But you go in on a VHF frequency, you come out on a VHF frequency. And then you receive on that VHF frequency and it goes out on that UHF frequency. It's usually set up in simplex or single frequency operation. But you can have this set up in this manner. Now, if you think about it, what is going to be a good use case scenario, John, where we need to have bi-directional duplexed repeaters? Once again, if you're going ahead and you're setting up a link, if you're setting up some sort of connection from a handheld out, there's numerous different ways to do it. But if you see here, you could in essence take that, hey, that UHF, have it set up on a repeater frequency, and then you could have the VHF set up on a repeater frequency. As long as you set it up right and there's no ping pong effect, you got to be careful, and there's debounce times. There's a lot more than just putting a radio and turning it on and saying it works, okay? But that's a good case use scenario for it. Now let's talk about the next one here. And the next one we're talking about is basically a unidirectional crossband repeater, okay? Unidirectional crossband repeating. Now what unidirectional means is just unidirectional, one directional. So in this case, this may be the user transmits on 452.000, and then 152.000 is what the other users are receiving. So in essence, what you do is you need a dual band radio in that case. Now, are there a lot of public safety or business dual band radios? There's not, but they're starting to become that way, okay? I will go ahead and I'll give you an example. Some people said, well, there's that, like for an example, the Anytone series of radios, that can do split frequencies. Amateur radios can do these split frequencies also too on there. And in these cases, this in essence is almost like what we call a remote receive site, if you really think about it. Now, why do I say if you really think about it? Well, how does a remote receive site work? Now, remote receive site is basically you have one repeater somewhere, right? And what happens is that you can't easily get into the repeater from a certain area, but you can hear the repeater, right? So you can hear the repeater all day long, but when you transmit into it, even with a handheld or even some cases with a mobile radio at high power, guess what? It's just not cutting the mustard. You just can't get into it. But if you had something that you could that could receive you locally and then send it out, well then guess what? Now you have a remote receive site, and now you actually have extended it. So in this case, how a situation of a unidirectional system could work is that you go in on one frequency. So let's say you have a VHF repeater, alrighty? And that VHF repeater, you can hear it. But what you could do then in that case is you can go into that local site. That local site is usually the same input, or it might be a slightly different frequency. And then what goes in, you go into that locally. Now, while you're going into that repeater locally, it is then crossing from that local repeater out to the main repeater. And then that main repeater is repeating you. Now, that is usually done on, you tend to see that done on like UHF links if you're in the amateur band. Public safety, it's kind of, or business, it's kind of a hodgepodge of things. Sometimes they're using not necessarily an RF link, but more of like an IP data link or something like that, or something of using like a microwave network that sends the voice down there. Point of the matter is that your receive site is unidirectional. It's receiving you, but then it's simultaneously transmitting out at that same time. Now, here's another undiscovered, I guess I want to say, but underrated aspect of a bi-directional, or excuse me, of a unidirectional crossband repeater. See, I got too many words there. MCOM purposes, emergency purposes, and I'm kind of pointing at you guys as amateur radio operators. Think of this. Repeater frequencies are crammed. Repeater frequencies are so jammed, okay? Then what happens is that, can we get a repeater pair? Oh, no, you may not be able to get a repeater pair. Okay, or maybe there's a shared non-protected pair, or whatever the case may be. But usually sometimes those repeaters are like the normal VHF split of 600 kilohertz, or maybe the UHF split of 5 megahertz, right? And then sometimes it gets difficult. But do we have a huge assortment of the amateur world of UHF simplex frequencies? Yeah, we kind of do. Do we have a huge assortment of VHF simplex frequencies? Yeah, we do. The 147 megahertz range between the inputs and outputs of the repeater band, there's a ton of simplex on there. So this is where you can easily make a crossband repeater for MCOM purposes. Now, what is the drawback? The drawback, obviously, is going to be that you need to have a dual band radio. But the positive side of this goes back to what we're talking about, this bi-directional. Bi-directional in this case is that you then take and have UHF users on one repeater and VHF users on another repeater. And if the VHF don't have UHF radios, that's fine. If UHF doesn't have VHF radios, that's fine. Not a problem. You can then facilitate cross communication on there. So that's kind of the interesting part of how a crossband repeater works with unidirectional versus bi-directional on there. Alrighty. Let's talk about another aspect of what actually some public safety agencies use. And I'm going to go ahead and actually reference the state of Wisconsin, how they used to do it. So the state of Wisconsin, before they went to trunking, before they went to P25 VHF digital trunking, what they did is that they had tower systems, or tower sites, obviously, and they had districts. So their district radio system would be one frequency. It'd be multiple sites. So a multiple receive and simulcasting is basically kind of what they were doing on there. But what happened was that the state patrol, they did not have good portable coverage because they had a large area they do that. But they would use their radios in where does state patrol do it, right? Their state patrol is usually out on the interstates, on county highways, state highways, those kind of things like that, right? They're not inside buildings and whatever. However, a handheld reaching maybe 20 miles away was really cutting it, where a mobile, 50 watts or 100 watts, hey, not a problem whatsoever. They could get into the towers and they could do all that kind of stuff like that on there. But how do you solve the gap with the handhelds? What they did is they went to what we would call vehicular or sometimes mobile repeaters. Alrighty. Now, let me do this. If you Google mobile repeaters, understand you're not going to find kind of this. You want to Google vehicular repeaters. And the reason being now is that maybe this is part of the what really bends my antenna, is that if you do mobile repeaters, it's all cell phone crap right now. Yeah, it's like these mobile repeaters. Well, you want to go ahead and extend your cell phone communications into the house here. Okay, fine. Forget it. Whatever. But what would happen in this case is that a user would take a handheld radio, and when they transmit, it would go back to their squad car. And this wasn't just law enforcement. EMS did this also too. Some fire services do this. So basically what it is instead of going ahead and trying to hit the radio tower that's maybe 10, 15 miles away from you with a handheld, when you're inside a building, all I had to do with my handheld is talk out to my units, to my apparatus, to my squad car. And when I went and talked from this radio out to that device, then that device would simultaneously transmit out to the system in the network. Now, the great part about that is that now you had pretty good reliable communications, because in essence, as long as you're 5 watt for VHF, 4 watt for UHF, maybe 3 watts for 800, because some people did it on 800s, if you were able to facilitate the communication just to your squad, your unit, your rig, your apparatus, you were able to get into the system usually bounding on there. And that was the great part about that system, that setup. And you had a whole slug of different things that can go in there. You could set off the alarm. So basically anything that you could do as your portable transmitting out to the system, you could actually also do with the mobile radio in the system on there. So that was kind of a great feat of technology at the time. Now, here's where this technology went askew a little bit. And here's where the issue had the problem. Is that for every communication between a portable and a squad, you had to be careful, because did you have to get frequencies for all the different squads? Like, did each squad, so if you have a fleet of, let's say 100 in a county, let's just argument's sake here, let's say you have a total of like 200 units that's made up of PD, fire, and EMS, right? So each time you have a squad car, are they using the same frequency over and over again? Because think of it, what's going to happen this way. Now, if you are one of these officers and 2 squads are on scene, now what would happen is if I key up and they're on the same frequency, both radios are going to key up. And what's dispatch or other units are going to hear? They're going to hear 2 radios fighting to get on the system, like 2 people talking over one another, even though it's the same person, right? So that was some of the issues that were growing pains as part of what we call vehicular repeaters. Now, as time went on, companies that made vehicular repeaters started to have different things on there. So you could use different tone sets on there. So you could use a PL tone. You could use a DPL tone. They would have different setups on there. So for an example, a handheld would transmit, let's say, a DTMF code or an MDC 1200 code on there. And what would happen is that would wake up that repeater. So in essence, you could have 5 repeaters come on scene or on site, right? And what would happen is that you have five squad cars, 5 officers, but each officer is on an individual kind of thing, and then they would be able to go ahead and then direct to their specific squad or their specific unit. Now, as time went along and evolved even more, okay, they incorporated different things. Alrighty, as I see it posted on there, Motorola did do a DVRS, which basically would let you do steering of channels, which you could almost like sync the 2 radios together. That was pretty big with MDC 1200 and rack. Pyramid Communications, Vertex made mobile repeaters. I think there's a few other companies that did it, and they started to have sync bits on there. So what would end up happening is that you would actually have people that when all the squads would pull up on scene, the one squad on scene already, or the one that had its mobile repeater on first, would be sending out a sync pulse. And then the other 2 or 3 units, how many got on scene, their mobile repeaters on the same frequency would hear that sync pulse, and then it'd be like, oh, whoa, wait a minute here. Wait a minute. Hang on. I got to go ahead and I'm going to shut down, or I'm not going to transmit. I'm not going to receive because there's one person talking even more. Okay, there's 1 unit already on there. So literally, squad 2 comes in, squad 1 and 2 both have mobile repeaters on, squad 1, beep. And that's what it would sound like to us, but there was sub-audible carriers and frequency tones in there that, would in essence tell the second squad with the mobile repeater, hey, shut up. I'm here. Okay, I'm here. Shut up. And then there were other problems on that. So the other problems that would come into play is that, okay, so you have, once again, 5 officers on scene. And what would happen is that, okay, now we solve the issue of 1 officer transmitting into 5 squads and all 5 squads keying up. But now you have a different issue. If you had signaling, if you had IDs on your radios, now those 5 officers, when they key up, they would always be going to that 1 squad. So if it's squad, badge 100, 101, 102, 103, and 104, if 104 talks and he goes out through 100 squad, guess what? 100 would come on, right? So that's when... can they solve that even more? Well, then the progression moved on to actually going ahead and saying, okay, now we're going to go digital. Now we're going to go digital signaling. Now we're going to go IDing. So now what could actually happen is that when the IDs would come into the system, now they've expanded it so that you can actually have the ID go transparent and pass through the system, depending on the make and the model of the technology. So lots of different technologies. What's the key point? Well, we kind of, as amateur radio operators, do this kind of thing. You don't really do it too much in GMRS because there's not really the ability to do it. But I guess, in theory, you could do it in band with FRS and GMRS. Could, sort of. But then public safety uses this a lot. And even business, some business stuff uses this kind of technology a lot on there. Now, what they said was, this is great using a radio and what have you. But now what people want to be able to do is they want to be able to talk on a singular device is really what they want to do. They don't want it to necessarily be a 2-way radio. And that's kind of what the State Patrol in Wisconsin uses now. They have handheld radios that can, talk on the state system that they're on, but they can also talk on to the local county systems. And when they want to be able to talk to their mobiles, they have a separate device that sits on their shoulders. So this is a picture of just one of many types of devices. It's the Maxon UDM 240 series. But as you see over here, there's these little devices. They're little small devices. I have a few. I actually use, believe it or not, I use a fair amount of them interfaced into my different radios and stuff like that on there. So I don't have to have, so it acts like a wireless mic on there. But what it does is it goes from basically you to a control interface. That control interface is interfaced into your radio, and then you key up and use it on the radio. So now literally what I can do with these situations, I can have a handheld radio on this side with the speaker mic listening to one channel, and then I could be talking on my main channel or something over here. So I could be like on a fireground channel or a tactical channel on my actual portable itself, and then I could actually be on the dispatch channel over here. Basically, I want to look like I'm carrying a bunch of different radios, right? Because that's the most important thing we have to do, right? To carry radios. But this kind of added on to there. Of the whole kind of thing that just kind of incorporated together of like how we can do that, how we can extend the range. So what does this all have to do kind of like the physiology of a repeater? Well, the physiology of the repeater is different than the anatomy of the repeater. And that's where it comes into play is because, once again, last week when we talked about anatomy of the repeater, we talked about components. So now let's combine the components of anatomy of the repeater to the physiology of the repeater. So we know we need a transmit radio. We know we need a receiver radio. Okay, that's great. That's the anatomy. Now the physiology can be what we see on the screen here, which it could be the same frequencies of going ahead and being set up on there, right? In the same band. So we have 159 as transmit into the repeater, and then 152 we receive from the repeater. Or we can go ahead and we can use a VHF and a UHF as an example of how that works on there. And then we can once again go even more where we get into bi-directional, we get into crossband, we get into all these things. That's the physiology part of the repeater. And that to me, that's just the cat's meow, okay? Cat's butt, let's call it that way, okay? If anybody's heard that saying though. And the reason I say this is because you're really only limited on what you want to connect or the infrastructure you want to connect on there. But also, too, think about it this way. When we talk about the physiology of the repeater here, and we work to kind of basically do building blocks of part of the anatomy of the repeater, now we have something that we can easily do, and as users, as radio users and everything, that normal people, that if they're looking for a box solution, yeah, you might find it, but now we expand it even more. And that's where I'm going to talk about get back screen here, my little project that I'm working on. And it's fun. So I am involved with many different radios. I have DMR radios. I have fusion radios. I have analog radios. I have P25 radios. I have next gen radios. And guess what? Unless I am somehow taking and taping these two radios together, which doesn't work. How do I communicate across different bands and different frequencies and different modes of operation with using one handheld? Now, this kind of gets into that concept of different things on there. So a lot of people want to cross digital modes. This is sort of like a crossing a digital mode, but it's also not. Okay, let's follow me on this one here. But obviously, if I have one model of radio, one digital technology of one radio, and I want to use it on a different digital technology, I need some sort of gateway, right? I need some sort of interface, right? How do I make that happen? How do I help facilitate that? And that's where my project is coming into. So we're going to be creative, people. Let's be creative. Many, many, many different radios now are coming with data ports, right? And guess what? What is data? Data is nothing more than sending out, as all my radio stuff fire falls, data is nothing more than sending out ones and zeros, right? But the data ports also do usually allow audio to come through, because that's what data is. It's audio noise, right? But why can't we put voice down the data input line? Okay. Now, there are a couple semantics we have to figure out. Like, is it flat audio? Is it modulated audio? Demodulated audio? What kind of inputs are we looking at? Everything like that in there. But I got to thinking, while it'd be cool to look in your truck like a porcupine, or your car to look like a porcupine and saying, I got one of every single manufacturer radios and stuff like that on there, and ha ha ha. Guess what? I don't want to do that, okay? Cars these days do not have any sort of room really whatsoever, right? That's why pretty much everybody's making a remote mount configurable type of mobile radio. So, let me think. What could I do? Well, it has a data port, right? If it has a data port, that means I could have an input on there. Now, the reason we need to also use a data port is because what we're going to do is we need to do something that's going to be bi-directional. So, you know what this is? Some might not. This is a data radio. That's what it is. Data radio. And yes, it even has a BNC connector. And guess what goes into this little port right there, folks? What goes into that port is power, and audio in, and audio out, and a PTT out, and a core sense. Now, core is carry operated relay. So here's what we can do with this radio. We program this radio. Now, there's little dip switches in here, but you program through that same port. Look how small this thing is. This is a 10-watt VHF radio, but it's also on DMR. So now what can I do? Well, I can mount this little baby in my car. Really kind of small. I mean, look at it. I mean, fits in my hand almost, right? And then I attach my antenna, whether it be where it be like this on there, or whether it be a magnet mount antenna or whatever. And now what I do is then I take one of the wires out of here. Now, once again, what did I say we need to deal with? Well, we need a core sense. We need a PTT sense. We need mic high, mic low. We need speaker high or speaker low, or mic plus, mic minus, speaker plus, speaker minus, right? So I have speaker, microphones, core sense, and PTT. That's all I have, right? Okay, so now what's going to happen is I'm going to take this. When this radio receives, alrighty, and this radio is then going to receive the audio, and then it's going to activate a core sense. So the pin out here for core sense is going to go active low. Okay, it's going to ground out. Well, guess what, folks? The PTT on the data port is looking for an active low. So now I'm going to take my active low and speaker out of here and go to the PTT and mic high and mic low here. So speaker out of that, mic in here, PTT from the core sense, guess what? Now this radio is keying this radio when something is received in this radio. Vice versa, we have the speaker out on the data port and a core sense on here. And the core sense is going to go to the PTT on here. And then the speaker out of here on the data is going to go to the mic high in on here. And now guess what? We have communications. If this is VHF and I'm on a UHF, it's guess what? Bi-directional crossband. Or, nothing says you can't do this, you can have bi-directional in-band, where this is VHF and this is VHF. Now, the issue you're going to run into, obviously, is filtering. This works really great in business or public safety because there's a lot of frequency space you can do. You can get mobile repeaters like up in the 170s and stuff like that on there. And then you go, boom, here you go. You go into there. So now what ends up happening is that now I'm taking this radio and I'm using this locally, and now it's going out to a repeater. But as they say, and Billy May said, RIP, but wait, there's more. Because now guess what this radio is? This radio is DMR. And what's this radio? Happens to be a fusion radio. What if this was DMR and P25? Or what if this was NextDen and DMR? The point of the matter is now I could take a DMR handheld, and now guess what? I've just crossed over to fusion. Or if I'm going DMR to P25, or I'm going, whatever your combination is. Now, yes, if we're doing digital, yes, it is considered what they call vocoding, okay, or double vocoding, actually. But if I'm using this as a UHF analog, okay, UHF FM, and I'm taking another mobile and going out on digital, it's no different than using my microphone and going into the front of here, right? So now what I did is not only did I do what we've been talking about, if going ahead and saying, okay, great, guess what? I'm going to go ahead and crossband, and I'm going to buy a directional crossband. But now I'm multi-moding bi-directionally crossbanding. I know that's what, okay, like the purple commercial, right? Okay, our heads blew up. But that's what I can do. So now here's the kicker of it. Business, this is great for business. And I say great for business because now, guess what? You have workers on site. They're talking to one another. And all of a sudden, they're all on channel 1 on scene here, right? And all of a sudden, the boss is calling them on a radio system. Now they turn to channel 2. Yeah, go ahead, boss. Now they're going from here to their crossband setup, or even in-band setup is okay. That means up to you, however you want to lay it out. In-band setup's okay, and you're going out and about and going out to the radio system you use. All righty? Once again, cross-moding on there too. Maybe I'm going in. Maybe I'm on, and this is very feasible, and this is very plausible. Maybe I'm on, or maybe I have to be on 2 different systems. Think of this. Lots of public works agencies, if they're not on a unified system, sometimes you find public works agencies on UHF, and sometimes you go ahead and find public safety, like police, fire, EMS, they're on VHF. Maybe they're UHF also, maybe they're 800, whatever the case may be. So now what you could do is you could have one radio set up to be able to communicate in a network, because nothing says the only limitations in this setup, okay, and the only limitations in this aspect of things is what you're using for radios and how do you want to make the wires, okay? If I have 2 of these, okay, in VHF, and I see the questions, what is the, and I'll explain it in a minute here. This is a VHF 10 watt FM or DMR capable radios. 10 watts in this little thing. By the way, I use it for APRS and I use it for a lot of things. It's only supposed to go 150 to 174, but you know what? There's a will, there's a hex edit, there's a way, right? Hi. But now here's what I could do. I could link 2 of these together. So let's say my public works agency is on UHF, right? If I have this set up, or I have a UHF radio, or however I have this set up now what I can do is, hey, guess what? I need to talk to public safety, or excuse me, public works. Guess what I could do with my VHF or my other handheld? Tune it to the channel, and then we facilitate, let me go to this picture, what I'm showing you here. We facilitate this. I'm using my handheld to talk back to my unit, rig, whatever. That is then going to go out to the network. That is then going to go out to the public works repeater, or that's going to go out to whatever. Now let's go ahead and talk about this also too in amateur usage. Obviously amateur usage, hey, I don't want to go ahead, and I find this out myself, I don't want to go ahead and buy a mobile radio for all the different digital modes, or maybe there's one digital mode I want to use and it's the repeater's too far away that I can hit on a handheld. Well, guess what? I can take my baby here, as I bought my microphone, my baby here, put it at my house, and then when I'm walking around the house, I could take my other radio, whether frequency that be or technology, and now, hey, I want to talk to the digital mode that's a 25-mile repeater away from me. Well, I could do it with a mobile radio and antenna on my house. Can't do it with my handheld, but now I just made it feasible and possible that I can facilitate this. So for tonight's, you know what really bends my antenna? When we've talked about repeaters last week, we talked about repeaters this week. We are really closed-minded, alrighty? The days of closed repeaters or specific repeaters, at least in the amateur community, has sort of died off. Still is there. GMRS, we have closed repeaters, obviously for different purposes. Business and public safety, yeah, those repeaters are usually set up for aspects of certain things. But what we do with the repeater, how we do with the repeater, how we use the repeater and stuff like that, we're really kind of, once again, closed-minded in these situations. What I mean by that is that we can literally build repeaters out of anything. And I say we, and I mean we. If you have the technical aptitude to do it, if you are not afraid to use a soldering iron in some cases, by the way, don't use it like that stupid commercial, or the picture, by the way, that I don't know who did that, but they have literally like here, let me grab this pen here real quick. If this is the soldering tip and here's the handle, they're having her grab here, okay? Good God. Anyways, that's for another episode of, you know what bends my antenna. But anyways, what I'm saying is that this project is case in point. two objects that help me facilitate in communication, right? Two objects which are simple to be able to hook up, which, yeah, do I have to take and get the pinouts for this? Yep, it's 15 pins. 15 pins, a D-sub 15 connector. Guess what? Guys, I know it's going to be hard for us to say, but we do have manuals that have that. I know. RTFM, I know. But what I'm saying, though, is that it's feasible. And you know what it's feasible even too is that on pretty much every single flippin' business or LMR or public safety radio, they have these data plugs for you automatically already. So you can literally crossband or cross mode or cross connect or whatever you want to do to your radios. As a matter of fact, I've done this numerous times with my public safety handheld. I would say probably this is the first vehicle I've had. No, I have it in my vehicle now, so I can't really say that. It took a while to get in there. But for those of you that know me, know that I'm also a paramedic. Alrighty. And even when I'm off duty, you're never off duty, especially like in a small town like this, right? But what happens is that what you do is that, okay, my public safety P25 radio is not going to be able to necessarily talk on different digital voice technologies, or maybe it's going to be able to hit the repeaters with great ease or something like that on there, right? Or maybe the chief's nice enough and lets me have maybe an amateur frequency or two in my radio. Well, okay, guess what? Now I can go back to my vehicle. If I'm near my vehicle, I can then go to my device in my vehicle, and then this device connects there. But here's the thing. And I hear this and I see this a lot, and I see it kind of a continuation from last week. People saying, oh my God, you got two handhelds strapped together to make a repeater. Yeah, I did that. I did that myself. I did it with actually a Vox unit. And as a matter of fact, I'll never forget when I did that and made it, guess what I would have to do? I'd have to key up, and those of you who have been in amateur radio for a long time will remember this. It was called a whistle repeater, where basically you key up and then you have to go and you'd make a quick whistle sound. That would activate the Vox circuit. Then the Vox circuit would key up the radio, and then what would end up happening there is then you just adjusted your delay on there for a little bit, and then boom, that would go ahead and do it. It was called a whistle up repeater sometimes, right? But guess what? Doing those repeaters is leading me to this project, okay? It's leading me, or has led me, to have business repeaters, to work on public safety repeaters, to work on amateur repeaters, to have FRS repeaters, okay? I'm just saying, it is there. Don't let anybody condemn you, okay? And also, don't be afraid to use repeaters properly to go ahead and extend the range of your system. I have crossband repeaters here that I can use a UHF radio to talk onto my VHF repeater, because guess what? Where it's at locally, I just can't get out of the basement. So guess what? What's wrong with having a crossband repeater? The instance is nothing. But with that also being said, is that the people who think they're the repeater police, slow your roll, okay? The FCC talks about crossband repeating. There are rules. There are regulations. They are very simple and easy to use. But a lot of people think that a crossband repeater or a little portable repeater or stuff like that needs to be this way and this way and this way and this way. No. As long as you're following the rules, as long as you're going ahead and experimenting and having a good time, and you can experiment. So let me clarify that. You can't just go ahead and be like, oh, I'm going to cross this over to public safety channel because I'm also a firefighter as well as an amateur. No, none of that stuff. What I'm getting at here with this, what bends my antenna, is to not be afraid or scared to experiment. Experimentation has led to a lot of what we have today as regular technologies. The biggest thing to do is just keep it legal and keep it safe. And that's what this week's, what bends my antenna is all about. But I've been chattering on here. It's been about an hour. I want to thank everybody that has gone and hopped into the chat here. I see a lot of great comments in there. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was a really good show for you. I think it's just a lot of people just sometimes aren't aware of all the different things that you can really do with a repeater for yourself. All right. It doesn't, once again, as we talked about last week, it doesn't have to be a repeater 300 feet up in the air and stuff like that and blah, 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 blah. I have a lot of fun with just crossbanding, repeating at home. And once again, I have a lot of dual band radios, public safety, business, and the likewise, that really can help facilitate these crossband things. And believe it or not, it really does pay off on there. So with that, I want to go ahead and say 73 to everybody. I want everybody to stay safe. If you have cigars, enjoy them. We want you to be around here for a long time and continue to watch the show. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Communications and Cigars. So until then, take care, everybody.